Racist police officer insults black woman, regrets it when she calls her team at the Pentagon. In a quiet suburban town where everyone knows everyone, an unexpected clash is about to explode. Naomi Lockhart, a poised and accomplished black woman on a brief visit home, finds herself at the mercy of a narrow-minded police officer who simply cannot see beyond her skin color. When Officer Bradley Norris launches into a tirade of vile insults, he has no idea who he's dealing with, or the powerful connections Naomi has back in Washington, D.C. As tension and tempers rise, a single phone call could shatter his entire world, unveiling a reckoning far beyond anything this small town has ever witnessed. Naomi Lockhart stepped off her flight at Raleigh-Durham International Airport just as the sun dipped below the horizon. She felt a flutter in her stomach, equal parts excitement and caution. It had been nearly 10 years since she had set foot in her hometown, a small place called Brookville on the outskirts of North Carolina's capital. So much had changed in her life, yet the main street of Brookville remained a ghost of her memories, cozy, familiar, stuck in time. She inhaled the sweet, humid air of early summer, and for a moment the stress of her high-profile job at the Pentagon melted away. A slender woman in her early 30s, Naomi wore her confidence like a well-fitted suit. She was known at the Pentagon for her expertise in strategic planning within the Department of Defense. Many colleagues, including high-ranking officials, sought her counsel on operational logistics. Still, none of that seemed to matter in Brookville. To the folks here, she was just Mimi, the wide-eyed girl who used to ride her bike down Maple Street. She was proud of her small-town roots, but couldn't deny the sense of unease that crept over her when she remembered why she left. Racism wasn't a new concept in Brookville, nor was it anywhere else. Here, however, it had worn her down in her youth, prompting her to set her sights on bigger places where she could flourish. Her mother, Lorraine Lockhart, had recently suffered a mild stroke. While she recovered in a local rehabilitation center, Naomi decided she needed to be back home at least for a few weeks to handle her mother's affairs and support her on the road to recovery. She rented a modest apartment in a newly built complex near the Old District, refusing her mother's pleas to stay in her childhood bedroom. Naomi craved personal space to process the swirl of emotions that came with returning home. As she cruised through the sleepy streets of Brookville in a rental car, Naomi noticed the same old grocery store where she used to buy candy with her allowance. The Vintage Theatre remained, its marquee advertising the same movie for the past month. Every time she recalled nostalgic moments, a pang of longing collided with a sense of dread. In the distance, she spotted the blue neon sign of a local diner, Patty's Eats, once famous for its homemade pies. Her stomach rumbled. She had skipped dinner on the plane. Maybe a slice of pie would be the perfect taste of homecoming. Little did she know that the second she walked through those squeaky diner doors, a chain of events would begin, setting off a confrontation that not only revealed hidden prejudices in Brookville, but also threatened to upend the carefully constructed career of a local police officer. Officer Bradley Norris prided himself on being the law in Brookville. A tall man in his 40s, he had a presence that he believed demanded respect, or fear, depending on who you asked. He drove his cruiser around the quiet streets as if they were under constant threat. In reality, Brookville had a low crime rate, marked by the occasional shoplifter or underage house party. But Norris's worldview was that crime was always lurking, ready to pounce. His personal life wasn't much better. Recently divorced and paying alimony, he found himself living in a run-down apartment. Everything in his life felt as if it was spiraling. He blamed immigrants, big city influences, and social justice movements for what he perceived as the country's downfall. When the conversation of race came up, Bradley rarely hid his disdainful opinions. He would cite law and order as his guiding principle, though in practice it often translated to policing minorities with undue suspicion. Several local residents of color whispered that Officer Norris was a bigot, but few dared to challenge him openly. The balance of power was firmly in his favor in a small town like Brookville. On this particular evening, Norris was patrolling the local diner area. Patty's Eats had been around since the late 1950s, and as it was a common meeting spot, Norris liked to loiter there, nursing a cup of coffee. It gave him a vantage point to observe who came and went. That night, as he parked his cruiser under a street lamp, he noticed a sleek black sedan pulling into the lot. It caught his attention immediately. Flashy cars were uncommon here. From a distance, he watched as a woman stepped out. Even from the corner of his eye, he registered that she was black. He felt a twinge of suspicion. Why was she here at this hour? Was she from around these parts, or some out-of-towner looking for trouble? He had no valid reason to suspect wrongdoing, but in his mind, he always had one motto: better safe than sorry. When Naomi walked into Patty's Eats, Norris decided to follow. He shut off his cruiser's engine, adjusted his belt, already heavy with handcuffs, baton, taser and firearm, and strolled with self-importance toward the entrance. He had no idea that this routine act of checking things out would soon become the biggest mistake of his career. Naomi felt an immediate wave of nostalgia upon entering Patty's Eats. The neon-lit menu board, the checkered tablecloths, and the lingering aroma of burgers and pies brought back childhood memories. Only a few diners were scattered around the booths, and a friendly waitress in her mid-50s greeted Naomi, offering her a seat by the window. She had barely taken her seat when Officer Norris walked in. He didn't remove his sunglasses, even though it was well past sunset. The waitress, Peggy, looked uneasy. Naomi noticed Peggy's flicker of apprehension. Perhaps she was used to Norris's overbearing presence. "Evening, Officer Norris," Peggy said, forcing a polite smile. He nodded curtly and slid into the booth across from Naomi's, as if staking out the place. Naomi placed her order, a cup of tea and a slice of the diner's famous apple pie. She tried to ignore the unsettling tension radiating from across the room. The officer seemed to be staring at her, and it was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. A few minutes passed, and Peggy returned with Naomi's tea and pie. As Naomi lifted her cup to take the first sip, Norris cleared his throat loudly. She glanced over in his direction, and their eyes locked. He pulled out a notebook and pen, a move Naomi recognized as a tactic to intimidate. "You from around here?" he asked, voice gruff and laced with suspicion. Naomi exhaled slowly. She reminded herself that courtesy often went a long way in small towns. "I grew up here, yes. Just visiting for a few weeks." Norris scrunched his nose. "Haven't seen you around in a long while. Must have left for bigger and better things, huh?" His tone carried more meaning than the words themselves. Naomi chose not to react to the implied insult. "Life took me elsewhere for work," she said calmly, taking a measured bite of her pie. "Work?" he pressed, leaning forward. "What kind of work?" Naomi fixed him with a steady gaze. "Government," she answered tersely. She had no desire to delve into her role at the Pentagon. She wasn't about to reveal personal information to a stranger who was already exuding hostility. Norris let out a dismissive laugh. "Government, huh? So you're one of those bureaucrats messing things up, telling us how to live our lives?" Peggy flinched from behind the counter, aware of how quickly these exchanges could go wrong. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her outward composure remained intact. She had faced more blatant racism and hostility in her lifetime. This was a test of her poise, which she had honed through years of working with high-ranking military and political figures. "Officer," Naomi said quietly, "I'm just here to have some pie and tea. I'm not looking for any trouble." Norris tapped his pen on his notebook. "Trouble follows certain people, whether they look for it or not, and around here we keep an eye on strangers." With that, he stood and stalked to the counter to pay for a coffee he had barely touched. Before leaving, he turned back to Naomi, scanning her from head to toe. "Watch yourself," he muttered, voice low but dripping with menace. Then he stepped outside, letting the door jingle behind him. Naomi drew a long, steadying breath. She glanced at Peggy, who offered a sympathetic look. Something in Naomi's gut told her that the officer's attitude was more than just a routine intimidation tactic. There was an edge to his words, an open hostility that went beyond a dislike for outsiders. She had encountered men like him before, but that didn't make it any easier. Instead of finishing her pie, she asked Peggy for a to-go box and left money on the table. Outside, the warm night air felt suddenly oppressive, tinged with the promise of trouble ahead. The next morning, Naomi rose early to visit her mother at Brookville Rehabilitation Center. She dressed in a simple blouse and trousers, wanting to look calm and reassuring for Lorraine, who had always worried too much. Naomi carried a small bouquet of fresh lilies, her mother's favorite. Brookville Rehab was a modest facility, but the staff was kind, and Lorraine had been making slow yet promising progress. As Naomi walked into her mother's room, she found Lorraine sitting by the window, gazing at the greenery outside. Lorraine's face lit up when she spotted her daughter. "Mimi, you're here bright and early," her mother said, a smile warming her features. Naomi set the lilies in a vase on the side table and kissed her mother's cheek. They chatted about the rehabilitation exercises, the food, and the staff. Lorraine insisted she was in good hands. Naomi offered updates about her own life, skirting the subject of the unsettling exchange at Patty's Eats. Her mother had enough to worry about, and Naomi didn't want to add any stress. Eventually, Lorraine's therapist arrived, so Naomi stepped out to let her mother work on physical exercises. Naomi headed to the facility's small cafeteria, aiming to check her phone for any urgent Pentagon emails. Although she was on leave, certain responsibilities still required her attention. She found a quiet corner and tapped out quick responses to a few messages from her colleagues, one of them referencing an upcoming meeting at the Pentagon's Joint Staff Office, which Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III was expected to attend. Naomi was crucial in preparing briefing documents, but for now her top priority was her mother. After finishing up, Naomi returned to Lorraine's room, helping her settle back in. They spent another hour discussing medical bills and some household issues that needed attention. Naomi promised to visit the bank and the pharmacy that afternoon. When she finally left the rehab center, a familiar tension tugged at her gut the moment she saw the reflection of a police cruiser in the glass doors. Turning around slowly, she saw Officer Norris leaning against his patrol car, arms folded across his chest, gaze unwavering on her. A wave of exasperation and apprehension washed over Naomi. What was he doing here? Was this coincidence, or was he following her? She decided to go about her business. After all, she had done nothing wrong. She drove to the local bank where she sorted out some of her mother's financial matters, then picked up prescriptions at the pharmacy. The entire time, she felt a prickling awareness, like eyes boring into the back of her neck. Sure enough, when she stepped out of the pharmacy, there he was. Norris was parked across the street, half hidden behind another car, obviously keeping an eye on her. Naomi clutched her purse tighter, forcing herself to remain calm. Years of working in high-pressure environments had taught her the value of composure. However, a faint tremor of anger seethed beneath her cool facade. In her line of work, Naomi had witnessed far more serious power plays, but this felt personal, like a local vigilante was trying to scare her back out of town, and that was not going to happen. Naomi pressed her lips together, mentally repeating, no confrontation, no reaction. If push came to shove, she knew exactly whom to call. That evening, Naomi locked the door to her rented apartment and headed to the small dining table. She prepared a light meal of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, comfort food that steadied her nerves. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, and a smile tugged at her lips when she saw the name flash across the screen. Lieutenant Sophia Holloway, one of her closest friends and colleagues at the Pentagon. Sophia was calling to check in on Naomi's mother's condition, but the moment Naomi mentioned her run-ins with Officer Norris, Sophia's tone grew serious. "Nay, are you okay?" she asked, voice low with concern. "That's harassment, plain and simple." Naomi sighed. "I'm fine, Soph. He hasn't done anything overtly illegal. He's just lurking, acting like I'm some threat. I'm used to people like him, but it's unsettling." Sophia fell silent for a moment. "You know," she said finally, "you don't have to tolerate that. This is 2025. The Department of Defense is big on ensuring the well-being of its personnel, even off-duty. If you need backup—" Naomi let out a slight chuckle, though it was tinged with worry. "I don't think I want to escalate. My mother's in rehab. The last thing she needs is a spectacle. But if it gets worse, I might need to call in some favors. Not to scare him or anything, but just to remind him that he can't keep harassing me." Sophia agreed, then filled Naomi in on some office gossip and updates. She mentioned an upcoming evaluation for a classified security project based out of the real-life Marine Corps base Quantico, in which Naomi had played a key role. Naomi missed the fast-paced environment, but was grateful for the reprieve to care for her mother, although this newfound local harassment overshadowed any sense of tranquility. After hanging up, Naomi felt a mix of relief and unresolved tension. She had her people, her team, at the Pentagon. If Norris pushed too far, she knew exactly who to call, and the resources at her disposal were far more than a small-town cop could anticipate. Still, she hoped the situation would resolve itself peacefully. Yet deep down, she sensed that this was only the beginning. The following day, Naomi decided to pay a visit to the local convenience store to pick up groceries for her apartment. The store was located in a strip mall near the city limit, an area known to be less affluent and more racially diverse. It was also a spot where local police cruisers were often seen circling under the guise of crime prevention. As Naomi walked through the aisles, she noticed a handful of familiar faces, neighbors and schoolmates from her youth, who greeted her warmly, though with a hint of caution. Word traveled fast in a small town. Some of them had likely heard about her tense interaction at Patty's Eats. Naomi engaged in light conversation, trying not to dwell on the tension. She was at the checkout counter when she saw Norris enter. Immediately the cashier stiffened. Another patron mumbled something under his breath and shuffled away. It was clear Officer Norris had a reputation for making people uncomfortable. He locked eyes with Naomi and slowly removed his sunglasses, sliding them into his shirt pocket. His presence almost felt deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. Naomi clenched her jaw, determined not to give him the satisfaction of intimidation. She handed the cashier her credit card, maintaining a calm demeanor. "Ma'am, would you mind stepping outside for a moment?" Norris suddenly asked, voice echoing in the quiet store. Naomi's heart hammered, but she refused to let it show. "I'm in the middle of checking out," she answered. "Is there an issue, officer?" His lips curled. "Just a few questions I need to ask. Won't take long." The cashier glanced apologetically at Naomi, handing back her card and receipt. Naomi took her grocery bag and followed Norris outside. He led her around the corner, away from the doors, so they were out of earshot but still in public view. "All right, what's this about?" Naomi asked, lifting her chin defiantly. Norris crossed his arms, towering over her. "Heard you've been snooping around town," he said with a sneer. "Asking questions about me, my conduct. I don't appreciate folks trying to stir up trouble." Naomi frowned. "I haven't been asking about you, officer. I'm here to take care of my mother and my own business. I suggest you stop harassing me." He took a step closer, and Naomi felt a flash of anger spike through her veins. "Harassing?" he repeated, mocking. "I'm just doing my job, making sure this town stays safe. We don't need outsiders bringing in big city problems." Naomi's voice dropped. "I grew up here," she said slowly. "I'm not an outsider, and my big city problem is simply that I work in Washington, D.C. for the Department of Defense. Do you really want to keep antagonizing me?" Norris blinked, clearly taken aback. For a moment, Naomi thought she glimpsed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but then he recovered, shrugging as if unimpressed. "I don't care if you're the president. You watch your step. People around here don't take kindly to arrogance." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Naomi grappling with a whirlwind of fury and frustration. She stood there for a moment, cheeks flushing, wondering how best to handle this. Even though she possessed the means to bring heavy scrutiny upon Officer Norris, her mother's well-being came first. A scandal or confrontation could bring stress and attention that Lorraine didn't need. Naomi resolved to document everything but remain calm, hoping Norris would back off once he realized she wasn't a threat. Yet, in her gut, she knew that if given the slightest excuse, he would push this further, and she might have no choice but to call in reinforcements. Officer Bradley Norris hadn't always been this belligerent. He was born in Brookville to a middle-class family. His father was a Vietnam veteran who struggled with PTSD, taking out his emotional trauma on those around him. Bradley learned early on that power meant control, and control could prevent the chaos he feared at home. In high school, he excelled in sports, particularly football. He was scouted by a few smaller colleges, but never received the big offers he believed he deserved. Eventually, he joined the military police in the army, but was discharged after a run-in with superiors over misconduct. He returned to Brookville, where the local police force needed new recruits. His father's old war buddy, who served as the police chief back then, vouched for him. Thus began a law enforcement career marked by bravado and an excessive need to assert dominance. Over the years, Norris had been reported multiple times for racial profiling, intimidation, and unnecessary use of force. But Brookville's old police chief and the mayor, who was more concerned with local politics and public image, always seemed to shield him from repercussions. Despite an internal investigation or two, he remained on the force. In recent months, however, the winds had started to shift. The old police chief had retired, replaced by Chief Roland Fisher, a more progressive leader from out of state. Fisher believed in community policing and accountability, rubbing some long-standing officers like Norris the wrong way. Whispers circulated that Fisher was quietly gathering evidence against those who abused their power. Norris, feeling threatened, ramped up his law and order performance, hoping to either intimidate Fisher or force him to resign. So far, the new chief had played his cards close to the vest. That anger, plus his looming divorce settlement and mounting bills, fueled the bitterness in Norris's heart. He looked for outlets to vent his frustration. Spotting Naomi, a successful black woman with a poised demeanor, was like waving a red cape in front of a raging bull. Her confidence grated on him. He interpreted it as arrogance, a challenge to his authority. Though he wouldn't admit it, deep down, a seed of fear sprouted within him. Something about Naomi's cool composure suggested she wasn't just any random visitor. He could sense she wielded power he didn't fully understand. But fear often manifested as aggression, and in Norris's case, it only hardened his resolve to put her in her place. Over the next few days, Naomi tried to carry on with her routine. Visiting her mother, coordinating therapy sessions, sorting out finances, and checking in with her colleagues in D.C. whenever she could. Despite her efforts to remain inconspicuous, she noticed Norris's patrol car in her vicinity far too often to be a coincidence. She debated whether to contact Chief Fisher directly, but decided against it for the moment. Instead, she documented every incident in a personal log, noting times, locations, and any remarks Norris made. Her years at the Pentagon had taught her the importance of thorough record-keeping. Naomi's official title was Strategic Operations Analyst within the Department of Defense. She specialized in logistical coordination for various military branches, ensuring that joint operations ran smoothly. She was also part of a special task force focusing on cybersecurity coordination with the National Security Agency, NSA, at Fort Meade. In short, she was no stranger to handling complex threats or navigating bureaucratic red tape. She knew exactly how to use the system to protect her rights if necessary, but she didn't want to go nuclear just yet. A part of her longed for the simpler, kinder Brookville she remembered as a little girl, a town with friendly neighbors and local events on the weekends. It pained her to realize how some things in small towns never changed. In her youth, she had experienced enough side-eyed glances, subtle discrimination in stores, and even open hostility from certain classmates. She thought she had outrun all that when she left for college in Washington, forging a brilliant career in the nation's capital. Now it felt as though the ghosts of Brookville's past had come to haunt her once more. In a particularly tense phone call, Colonel Marcus Nguyen, one of her direct superiors at the Pentagon, mentioned that he noticed her unusual request for extended leave. Concerned about her well-being, he asked if everything was fine. Naomi hesitated, choosing not to divulge the harassment details just yet. She simply explained that her mother was ill, and she needed time to care for her. Colonel Nguyen was supportive, urging her to take as much time as she needed. After the call, Naomi felt a pang of guilt for not coming clean about her troubles in Brookville. Her colleagues had her back, always, but she also felt protective of her mother and hoped to resolve the matter without dragging in her entire chain of command. She still believed in a peaceful resolution, although that belief was weakening by the day. The tipping point came one humid afternoon when Naomi drove to a local hardware store to pick up a spare key she had ordered. She wanted to give it to a neighbor in case of emergencies related to her mother's condition. While browsing through gardening supplies, she heard a commotion at the front of the store. Walking toward the noise, she saw Officer Norris, face twisted with rage, cornering a young black teenager who was clearly terrified. "I saw you pocket something, boy," Norris snarled, gripping the teen's arm so tightly that the boy winced. "Hand it over." Onlookers watched, some stepping back in alarm. Naomi recognized the teen. He was the son of one of her old classmates, a 16-year-old named Malik, who attended Brookville High. Malik's eyes darted frantically. "I didn't steal anything," he cried. "I have money. I was buying gloves for my mom." Norris's face flushed. He reached down to pat Malik's pockets, ignoring the teen's protests. Naomi felt a surge of outrage. She instinctively stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Officer Norris," she said loudly, "the kid says he hasn't stolen anything. Maybe we should ask the store manager to check the cameras before manhandling him." Norris whipped around, eyes blazing. "Stay out of this," he snapped. "This is police business." Naomi stood her ground. "Assaulting a minor isn't part of your job, officer. If he's stolen something, let's handle it according to proper procedure. You're manhandling him without cause." A few people murmured in agreement, emboldened by Naomi's willingness to confront Norris. The store manager emerged from behind the counter, wringing his hands nervously. Norris's grip tightened on Malik's arm for a moment longer, before he finally released the boy. "Check the cameras," Norris demanded. "If I see he's taken anything—" Naomi cut in, her voice steady. "He should be presumed innocent until proven otherwise. That's the law you swore to uphold, right?" Norris glared at her with palpable hate. The manager scurried off to review the security footage. After several tense minutes, he returned, shaking his head. "I didn't see Malik take anything, officer. It looks like he was just browsing." Norris shoved a finger in Malik's face. "Don't let me catch you pulling anything," he warned. Then, as he turned to Naomi, his voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "And as for you, maybe you should mind your own business next time." Malik's mother had arrived by then, whisking her son away with tears in her eyes. Naomi felt a swirl of rage, pity, and determination. She saw the looks from the other customers. Most of them seemed relieved that Norris's bullying had been called out, but none dared to speak up directly. Norris gave Naomi one last menacing look before marching out of the store, leaving everyone in uneasy silence. For Naomi, this was the final straw. She had tried to remain calm, to avoid escalation, but a line had been crossed. Norris's racism and abuse of power were affecting innocent community members, not just her. If the local authorities weren't going to stop him, she knew exactly who could. That evening, Naomi locked her apartment door and paced the living room, heart racing. The memory of Norris's aggression toward Malik replayed in her mind, fueling her resolve. Enough was enough. She scrolled through her phone's contact list, pausing over Lieutenant Sophia Holloway's name before pressing the call button. "Sophia?" Naomi asked when her friend answered, voice quivering with controlled anger. "I need your help. Things have escalated. This officer is out of control. He's harassing me and other black residents. I can't let this go on." Sophia's voice was gentle, yet firm. "I'm so sorry this is happening. We've got resources that can at least shine a spotlight on local corruption. You know we have protocols for off-duty protection if an officer in uniform is targeting a Department of Defense analyst. Let me talk to Colonel Nguyen. He'll coordinate with our legal and security teams." Naomi clenched her phone, feeling torn about drawing official attention to her personal ordeal. But the hardware store incident had hardened her resolve. "Yes," she replied, voice steadier now. "I think it's time. We can't let him keep doing this." Sophia assured Naomi she'd handle it discreetly at first, gathering information and determining the best way to involve official channels. They'd consider the possibility of contacting the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Justice, if it came to that. Naomi thanked her friend, a weight lifting from her shoulders, even as a new tension emerged. Once the Pentagon got involved, this would no longer be a quiet local matter. The possibility of blowback was real. But Naomi was prepared to face whatever came next. Officer Norris had shown his true colors, and she had no intention of letting him continue unchecked. As she ended the call, Naomi sent a silent prayer that her mother would remain unaffected by any turmoil about to unfold. Unbeknownst to Naomi, word of Officer Norris's volatile behavior was already reaching Chief Roland Fisher. A soft-spoken yet determined man in his early 50s, Fisher had been systematically gathering information on corrupt or overly aggressive officers. He believed in building bridges between law enforcement and the community, a stark contrast to Norris's approach. When the complaint about the hardware store incident landed on his desk, complete with a statement from the store manager and phone footage captured by a customer, Fisher knew it was time to act. He reviewed the footage, seeing Norris's hostile posture toward a frightened teenage boy. Then he observed a brief moment where Naomi stepped in, calmly intervening. Fisher paused the video, zooming in on Naomi's face. He realized she was the same woman Norris had been mentioning in passing reports, someone he considered suspicious and in need of watching. Fisher drummed his fingers on his desk. If this woman was somehow connected to the federal government, and he suspected from rumors that she was, then Norris was skating on very thin ice by harassing her. Fisher understood that a storm could be brewing if the wrong people caught wind of Norris's behavior. As if on cue, Fisher's phone buzzed. An unknown Washington, D.C. number. He hesitated before picking up. "Hello, this is Chief Fisher of Brookville PD." A measured, professional female voice responded. "Good afternoon, Chief Fisher. I'm Lieutenant Sophia Holloway, calling in reference to Mrs. Naomi Lockhart. I believe she's a resident of your town for the time being." Fisher felt a ripple of tension. He gleaned from the tone that this was not a social call. "That's correct. How may I help you, Lieutenant?" Sophia explained that Naomi had reported ongoing harassment by one of Fisher's officers. She mentioned the possibility of formal complaints and investigations if the harassment continued. She maintained an even tone, courteous yet firm, implying the might of the Department of Defense stood behind Naomi. When Fisher ended the call, he knew his next steps must be delicate. He had no intention of shielding Norris, but local politics could get messy, especially if the mayor got wind of a potential scandal involving a racist officer and a federal official. Nonetheless, Fisher resolved to bring Norris in for a private discussion the following morning. An internal investigation was imminent, and if Norris was too blinded by arrogance to see the storm coming, then he would be left to face the consequences of his actions alone. Early the next day, Norris received a summons to Chief Fisher's office. He shuffled in, jaw clenched, chest puffed out as if expecting a confrontation. Fisher sat behind his desk, posture calm, but eyes critical. "Have a seat, Officer Norris," Fisher said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Norris dropped into the chair, arms crossed. "What's this about, Chief?" Fisher folded his hands on the desk. "It's about your recent interactions with a Ms. Naomi Lockhart and a local teen named Malik. There's video footage of you aggressively confronting Malik at the hardware store." Norris's expression hardened. "Kid was acting suspicious. I had probable cause." Fisher raised an eyebrow. The store manager says otherwise. Plus, you had no real evidence of theft. You also forcibly detained him. That's not procedure, Norris. Norris scoffed, shifting in his seat. The kid was mouthy. These people... Fisher's gaze sharpened. What do you mean, these people? Norris cleared his throat. I mean troublemakers who think they can get away with anything. Chief, you know how some folks around here push boundaries. If we don't clamp down, they'll walk all over us. A tense silence filled the office. Fisher let out a controlled breath. That's enough. I've also received a call from the Department of Defense regarding Mrs. Lockhart. Do you have any idea who she is? Norris froze, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his face. She's some government pencil pusher from D.C. She thinks she can breeze into my town and do whatever she wants. Officer Norris, Fisher said slowly, she's more than a pencil pusher. My understanding is that she works closely with high-level military personnel. She's not someone you want to antagonize without cause. The Pentagon is now aware of your interactions, and if they decide to press the matter, it could lead to a federal investigation. At the mention of a federal investigation, Norris felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Still, pride and stubbornness kept him from backing down. Let them investigate, he muttered, defiance dripping from every syllable. I've done nothing wrong. Fisher studied him, a mix of frustration and pity in his eyes. We'll see. For now, consider this a formal warning. You are not to approach Miss Lockhart unless it's an emergency. Understood? Norris rose from his chair, hands balled into fists at his sides. Understood, he growled, stalking out of the office. Outside, the midday sun blazed, mirroring the heat of his anger. Fury boiled in Norris's veins. How dare this woman, this outsider, bring federal eyes upon him? He felt cornered, threatened. In his mind, the solution was to reassert control. Instead of heeding Fisher's warning, Norris vowed to keep an even closer watch on Naomi Lockhart. She would regret meddling in his business. News of the hardware store incident spread quickly, thanks to social media. A bystander had recorded part of the confrontation, uploading it to a local Facebook group. It didn't take long for Brookville residents, especially the black community, to vent their collective outrage over Norris's bullying tactics. Several residents began sharing their own stories of harassment by Norris, posting anecdotes of traffic stops that led to humiliating searches, or even minor infractions that turned into intimidating lectures. An undercurrent of anger united them. They had tolerated Norris's behavior for years, believing there was no point in fighting back, given how the old leadership turned a blind eye. But now, with a new police chief and an emboldened figure like Naomi Lockhart in town, something shifted. People sensed a turning tide. A small group met in the basement of the local church to discuss filing a formal complaint. Among them was Cassandra Welch, Malik's mother. Hands trembling with anger, she relived the moment her son called her in tears after Norris's assault. Others chimed in with their own encounters, each one adding fuel to a growing determination. Naomi found herself invited to the gathering by the church's pastor, Reverend Isaiah Brown, a compassionate man in his 60s. She decided to attend, feeling both honored and anxious. She didn't want to overshadow the local voices who had endured Norris's harassment long before she returned. But she recognized her unique position to amplify their concerns, given her connections. That evening in the church basement, the group shared stories, each narrative more harrowing than the last. Naomi sat quietly at first, absorbing the pain, fear, and frustration. Eventually, she spoke up, encouraging the group to collect and organize their evidence. She mentioned that she had connections to legal resources in Washington. If the town's leadership failed to act, they could escalate the matter at the state or federal level. Seeing her speak with such resolve, the residents found renewed hope. They decided to form a small coalition and draft a collective complaint to submit to Chief Fisher and the mayor. If that failed, they would move upward to the state attorney general's office and beyond. It was a bold step for a small community, but the time for fear had passed. Naomi left the meeting feeling a swirl of emotions. Part of her was proud to stand in solidarity with her hometown. Another part was worried about potential retaliation from Norris. Yet, amid the worry, she felt a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't alone in this fight, nor were the residents. Together, they had a chance to effect real change. Sitting in his patrol car outside a rundown apartment complex, Norris seethed. A fellow officer, Pete Larson, had tipped him off that a community meeting had taken place at the local church regarding potential complaints against him. Larson mentioned Naomi Lockhart's involvement. The tension in Norris's jaw was almost painful as he imagined them plotting his downfall, painting him as a racist tyrant. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, considering his options. The rational move would be to lay low, follow Chief Fisher's orders, and hope the situation would blow over. But rational thinking was clouded by Norris's bruised ego and festering anger. He gripped the wheel tighter. This was his town, his turf, and he would not be run out by some fancy Pentagon operative or a group of small-timers complaining about racial harassment. He decided to take a drive past the church, where the meeting had supposedly been held. When he arrived, the building was dark and locked up for the night. Still, he circled the block a few times, frustration mounting. His eyes narrowed on a small car pulling out of the church's parking lot. One that he recognized from previous nights parked outside Naomi Lockhart's apartment complex. He followed it at a distance. Sure enough, the driver was Naomi. She seemed lost in thought, not even noticing his cruiser behind her. Norris's pulse quickened. He wanted a reason, any reason, to pull her over, to put her in her place once and for all. As he trailed her onto a quiet stretch of road, his mind conjured up justifications. Maybe she drifted onto the shoulder or had a tail light out. He could claim probable cause. Teach her a lesson, show her that the local police were not to be trifled with. He accelerated, switching on his overhead lights. Naomi's car slowed to a stop along the deserted street. Norris parked behind her, heart hammering with adrenaline. He stepped out, hand on his holster, and approached Naomi's driver's side window. She rolled it down, face calm but eyes wary. "Is there a problem, officer?" Norris glared down at her. "Your brake light's flickering," he lied. "License and registration." Naomi's lips tightened. She retrieved the documents from her glove compartment, handing them over without a word. Norris pretended to inspect them carefully, though all he saw was red. His breath came in ragged bursts, fueled by the anger that churned inside him. "You've been a real nuisance," he spat finally, voice trembling with barely restrained hostility. "Stirring up folks, spreading lies. Let me give you some advice. Cut it out, or you'll wish you never came back." Naomi's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I suggest you check yourself, officer. You're overstepping your bounds, and you know it." Norris leaned closer, face inches from Naomi's. "Is that a threat, Miss Lockhart?" She held his gaze. "It's a fact. Back off, or you'll be facing far more than a few local complaints." For a moment, Norris felt a flash of fear, but pride won out. He handed back her license and registration, stepping away from the window. "Watch yourself," he warned, voice low. Then he marched to his cruiser, flicked off the lights, and sped away into the night. Naomi took a moment to steady her breathing, anger and anxiety coursing through her. This had to stop, and it had to stop now. Early the next morning, Naomi awakened to a barrage of text messages and missed calls from her Pentagon colleagues. Lieutenant Sophia Holloway had left several voicemails, each progressively more urgent. Naomi's heart pounded as she listened. "Naomi, it's Sophia. We have a situation. Colonel Nguyen wants you on a conference call, ASAP. Call me back." Naomi quickly dressed and made a strong cup of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed Sophia's number. Her friend picked up on the first ring. "Naomi, Colonel Nguyen got wind of the late-night traffic stop. He's concerned about your safety. He wants to deploy a small security detail, or at least request assistance from the FBI's Civil Rights Division if the local force won't protect you." Naomi rubbed her forehead, a migraine creeping in. "I'm fine, but things are spiraling. This officer pulled me over on a bogus claim. He's threatening me, Sophia. The community is coming together to file complaints, but that might take time." Sophia paused. "We can expedite this through official channels. Colonel Nguyen is prepared to escalate. We've also got some folks in the Department of Justice who'd be willing to open an investigation if necessary." Naomi sighed. "Let's do it. I'm done playing nice. I'm not just fighting for myself, it's the entire community. Norris is out of control." Within hours, Naomi was on a secure video call with Colonel Nguyen and several Department of Defense legal advisors. They discussed the potential legal avenues, the possibility of involving the FBI, and even the local U.S. Attorney's Office. This was no longer an internal matter for Brookville PD. If necessary, the federal government would intervene to protect Naomi's rights as a citizen and a Pentagon official. Colonel Nguyen's voice was firm but compassionate. "Naomi, I can authorize a discreet Pentagon security detail to ensure your safety. They won't storm the town unless necessary, but they'll be there in plain clothes, ready to document any further harassment or unlawful acts." Naomi agreed to the plan. The stark reality was that she needed protection. Officer Norris was unpredictable, perhaps even dangerous. She also felt a sense of relief that the burden of dealing with him no longer rested solely on her shoulders. By evening, 2 Pentagon security officers, Agents Melissa Clark and Jordan Wallace, arrived in Brookville. They met Naomi at her apartment, introducing themselves with friendly smiles, but a professional air that left little doubt about their competence. Naomi felt a wave of reassurance as she welcomed them in, explaining the layout of the town, Norris's usual patrol routes, and the spots where she often saw him lurking. As dusk fell, Naomi realized the gravity of the situation. She was effectively under federal protection from a local police officer. The irony was thick. Yet, amid the turmoil, she felt a surge of conviction. If Norris persisted, he was in for a rude awakening. The Community Coalition had completed its collective complaint and delivered copies to the mayor's office, Chief Fisher, and the local media. Stirred by the public outcry, an investigative reporter from the News Observer, a well-known North Carolina newspaper, showed up in Brookville. They interviewed several residents who claimed harassment by Norris, including Malik and his mother. Soon, a feature article was in the works, shining a harsh spotlight on the Brookville Police Department. Meanwhile, the mayor was feeling the heat. He called an emergency town council meeting, inviting Chief Fisher, local community leaders, and even Naomi, who now had a direct stake in the proceedings. Under the watchful eyes of the reporters and a growing crowd of protesters outside, the mayor opened the floor for discussions. One by one, residents recounted their experiences with Norris. Some were trembling, others were furious, but the message was consistent. The officer had abused his power, and they wanted justice. When it was Naomi's turn, she rose from her seat, the 2 Pentagon agents observing from the back of the room. She spoke calmly, recounting her encounters with Norris, emphasizing the needless aggression and intimidation. She also revealed her position with the Department of Defense, subtly hinting that higher authorities were aware of the situation and would intervene if local remedies failed. The room buzzed with tension. Chief Fisher stood after Naomi, clearing his throat. He confirmed that an internal investigation was already underway, stating he planned to place Norris on administrative leave pending the outcome. There was a smattering of applause from the audience. The mayor, face drawn and sweaty, nodded vigorously, trying to placate the crowd. He promised transparency and accountability, though some residents eyed him with skepticism. After all, the town's leadership had allowed Norris to go unchecked for years. By the time the meeting adjourned, the writing was on the wall. Norris was under intense scrutiny. The crowd spilled into the street, chanting for justice and waving homemade signs. Among them stood Malik, holding a poster that read, "My life matters." Naomi felt a lump in her throat as she witnessed the swelling unity. Perhaps this town could change, given the right catalyst. She only prayed it wouldn't take further tragedy to make it happen. That night, as protests simmered in front of the police station, Norris paced his cramped living room, the local news playing in the background. He watched footage of the town council meeting, hearing the voices of those who accused him. He saw Naomi calmly recounting how he had threatened and harassed her. His blood boiled. Glaring at the TV, he grabbed his phone and dialed an old friend, one of the few allies left in the department. The friend advised him to lawyer up, maybe even consider skipping town for a while until things cooled off. But Norris refused to be driven out like some criminal. The more cornered he felt, the more determined he became to lash out. He slammed his phone onto the table, mind churning with desperate thoughts. He couldn't let that woman or the others ruin his life without a fight. Spying a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the counter, he poured himself a hefty shot, downing it in one gulp. Then, in a burst of impulsiveness, he grabbed his keys and stormed out. He drove through Brookville's streets, the night sky illuminated by a few street lamps and neon signs from all-night diners. His mind swirled with rage and liquor. If he could only catch Naomi in some violation, some slip-up, he could arrest her, or at least publicly humiliate her. That would shut her up, scare her off. In a chilling moment of clarity, he remembered Naomi's mention of her mother at the rehab center. A cruel idea formed in his mind. Perhaps if he could dig up some evidence of wrongdoing in the mother's finances or something else, he could threaten Naomi with it. He wasn't above planting a little proof, if that's what it took to maintain control. He drove past the rehab center, headlights off, scanning for anything suspicious. The parking lot was empty except for a nurse's car. Norris circled the building like a vulture, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Nothing. Frustrated, he peeled out of the lot, leaving skid marks behind. Overhead, a security camera blinked, capturing his every move. It would soon be yet another piece of evidence in the mounting case against him. The next morning, Naomi was on a conference call with Colonel Nguyen and Lieutenant Holloway when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Agents Clark and Wallace, faces grim. "Ms. Lockhart," Wallace said, "we have footage of Officer Norris circling the rehab center last night with his lights off. It came from the facility's security cameras. We also have statements from witnesses who saw him driving erratically around town." Naomi's stomach lurched. "He went to my mother's rehab center." "Appears so," Clark answered gently. "That's a step too far. Colonel Nguyen has authorized us to escalate the matter. We'll be reaching out to the FBI field office in Raleigh and possibly the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice." A rush of relief and anxiety washed over Naomi. She stepped aside, letting the agents enter. They sat down at her small dining table, opening laptops and phones, coordinating with federal contacts. This was precisely the scenario Naomi had hoped to avoid, her personal issues blowing up into a federal case. But Officer Norris's actions left them no choice. By late afternoon, the wheels of federal investigation were officially in motion. An FBI agent named Constance Rollins, who specialized in civil rights violations, arrived in Brookville. She interviewed Naomi, the community members, and Chief Fisher, methodically piecing together a case against Norris. For years, Norris had skated by on the town's indifference or fear, but now he faced the scrutiny of the federal government, a force far beyond his local influence. Reports circulated that Norris had been placed on immediate suspension. His weapon and badge were confiscated, pending the outcome of the investigation. The shift in community mood was palpable. Cautious hope intermingled with a long-overdue sense of validation. People who had felt voiceless for years finally believed that justice might be served. Meanwhile, Naomi visited her mother, who had heard tidbits about the uproar but hadn't grasped the full extent of the situation. Lorraine could tell from Naomi's tense demeanor that something was seriously wrong, yet Naomi tried to reassure her that everything would be fine. At least, she hoped it would be. With the FBI now involved, the situation had taken on a life of its own. A few days later, Brookville awoke to the sight of multiple black SUVs parked outside the police station. The FBI, in cooperation with the Department of Justice, was there to execute search warrants related to Norris's activities. They confiscated his work computer, phone records, and any relevant documents. Word spread like wildfire, attracting a throng of onlookers who gathered in front of the station. Officer Norris, unshaven and dishevelled, stood by helplessly as federal agents combed through his desk, removed files, and snapped photos. He could feel every eye on him, officers, reporters, residents, all waiting to see how the mighty had fallen. When FBI agent Constance Rollins approached him, a pair of handcuffs dangling from her belt, his bravado finally cracked. "Is this really necessary?" he spat, voice shaking. "You're under arrest for multiple civil rights violations, including racial harassment and assault," Agent Rollins stated, voice cold with professional detachment. "You have the right to remain silent." Norris looked around wildly, searching for some ally, some lifeline. He saw only stern faces and silent condemnation. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he realized that the system he had abused for so long had finally turned against him. Pride gave way to panic, and for the first time, tears welled in his eyes. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers as Norris was led into a waiting vehicle. Among them stood Cassandra Welch and Malik, holding each other in relief. Standing beside them, Naomi felt an intense swirl of emotion, vindication, sadness, and hope for the future. She glanced at Agents Clark and Wallace, who nodded at her, their expressions solemn yet satisfied. The final blow would come through the courts, where Norris would face the weight of federal charges. But for now, Brookville's long nightmare of unchecked racism by one of its officers was over. The town could finally begin to heal. In the weeks that followed, Brookville began a slow but determined journey toward reform. Chief Fisher implemented community outreach programs, recruited more diverse officers, and ensured that body cameras were standard. The mayor's office established a citizens' review board to oversee complaints against law enforcement. While deep-seated prejudices wouldn't vanish overnight, at least steps were being taken in the right direction. Naomi spent her remaining time in Brookville focusing on her mother's continued recovery. With Norris gone, the air felt lighter, even if the scars he left behind remained. People waved to Naomi in the street, stopping to thank her for her courage. She always responded that it was a collective effort. The community's willingness to stand up was what truly made the difference. Finally, the day came when Lorraine was well enough to manage on her own, and Naomi's leave was drawing to a close. Packing her suitcase felt bittersweet. She looked around her small apartment, temporary yet filled with significant memories. Agents Clark and Wallace came by to say goodbye, praising her for her calm resolve. They would remain in contact, ensuring the court proceedings against Norris went smoothly. On her last evening in town, Naomi took a final drive through the streets of her childhood, passing by Patty's Eats, the hardware store, and the rehab center where her mother had stayed. She reflected on how much she had grown since leaving Brookville, and how the town itself now had a chance to grow beyond its old limitations. The next morning, she embraced her mother outside the apartment. Lorraine's eyes brimmed with pride and tears. "I'm so proud of you, Mimi," she whispered, kissing her daughter's cheek. Naomi hugged her back, emotion tightening her throat. "Take care of yourself, Mom. I'll be back soon, I promise." As she drove away, Naomi felt a profound sense of closure and new beginnings. She had confronted old wounds and discovered a communal power she never knew existed in Brookville. And as she merged onto the highway, she smiled, thinking of how the once small-town girl was returning to the Pentagon with yet another mission accomplished. This time, though, it wasn't just about national security. It was about justice, dignity, and the unstoppable force of a united community. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey through Brookville, where prejudice collided head-on with courage and justice won out. If you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and ultimately the triumph, then you've shared in Naomi's determination to stand firm in the face of intimidation. Her story shows that sometimes the battles we least expect to fight are the ones that define us and transform our communities. If this story inspired or moved you in any way, I encourage you to hit the like button, share this video with friends or on social media, and subscribe to my channel for more captivating tales. Your support helps these stories reach more people, spreading messages of resilience, unity, and hope. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and continue paving the way for a more just, empathetic world. Thank you for watching.